So yesterday CNN tracked him down, and they like went to his office in Florida, and nobody would let them in or talk to him, and they said he wasn't there. So they went to his house, and they wouldn't let him. His maidservant or whoever wouldn't let him into his house, and so they were like, walking back to their own car, and they see him bicycling through the neighborhood, and he looks like, I mean, if you Google Florida man, that's what he looks like when he's wandering around there. He's wearing like a pair of shorts and literally nothing else. No shirt, no shoes, not even flip-flops, on a mountain bike with an iPad tucked into his butt. And and of course he's, got, avoiding the camera and, not answering questions and doing that kind of thing. But it's like, well, of course this guy is crazy and making these outlandish claims. He's the creepy dude who shows up at your beach gathering, like asking if he can have a sip of your soda. Like
So he's a Florida man, essentially. He's
yeah,
the newsworthy Florida man who happens to have a medical license miraculously, because we all know the thing he fears most at this point is being known forever as malpractice Mercola. So he's trying to avoid that at all costs.
Right. And just escaping from social media, escaping from the internet as much as he can is his protection mechanism. And what did he say in that video? Like, he's like, I'm still going to publish articles, but they'll only be up for 48 hours. I don't think he is aware that once you put something on the internet, it's there forever.
Oh, so I think he's aware.
One little point, Andy and Brehan. I'm not sure that he actually has a medical license. He has a medical degree, but you have to meet certain requirements of a state board and remain in good standing to have a medical license.
And letting that lapse could be strategic, because then you're able to say whatever you want at that point. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. If you want to really take care of people the way we all do, we have relationships with patients who come to us for help, and we have to give them advice that's based upon reasonable evidence. And if we give them advice that's based on evidence that isn't reasonable, we will get sued, we will have our license taken away, because we shouldn't be allowed to give people bad information.
And the ethical standards are definitely not going to align with his marketing approach for the last 20 years, which has been to suggest that a product like beds, the coil springs in your beds, are acting like Wi-Fi, acting like antennas to zap radiation into the spine. If you suggest that and then turn around and say, oh, but I sell really expensive mattresses that don't do this, that's suspicious, one might say.
Yeah, creating that kind of false fear in order to sell a product.
But that's been working for him. And every time he has a big product push, it's started with this kind of either directly or indirectly hinting that the competing product is going to hurt you in some way, even when there's weak to no evidence of this. And even if this is like selling tanning beds, he's really seemed to be pretty unscrupulous about saying whatever, so long as he can make a sale.
Yeah, saying that more ultraviolet radiation is going to decrease the risk of cancer.
And, it's probably like a sweet spot thing, right? I mean, you can look at evidence out there that says too much is really bad, and also never going into the sun is also bad. And this is the kind of nuance that we look at information within medicine. It's this Goldilocks thing, right? Too little, too much. You've got to get it just right. But then to say, well, I'm going to use this one piece of information in order to scare you into buying this, to scare you into this trap that I'm going to have to get your wallet. That's where I think people have a little bit of a problem with him.
Yes. I mean, a little bit of a problem. People may not be aware that the FDA no, the FTC sued him, and he was required to repay. The reports I've seen are between 2.9 and $5.3 million to people who bought these tanning beds that didn't have the benefits that he claimed they did.
And to somebody who hasn't amassed $100 million, that's enough to stop you. But when you have this entire empire of misinformation churning out millions of dollars a year, these really are just speed bumps. They're not enough to stop him. In fact, then he can use a term coined by a friend of mine, Koji, martyr marketing. He can say, see, big government is out to get me. See, they want to stop me because I'm telling the truth. When really they're trying to stop you because you're being a bastard. And you're not allowed to do those things. There are consequences for these actions. But to act like you're oppressed when you do something wrong, it works for marketing. It allows people to feel like they're on team good guy, when in reality, he's manipulating people like any Florida con man would.
I feel like the term freedom of speech gets thrown around a lot with these kinds of these kinds of circumstances where people are making either outlandish claims or fear-based claims, or try to instill in fear in others, and then they get shut down, or at least financially encouraged to stop saying spreading terrible lies, and they say their freedom of speech is being
Impeded.
compromised, impeded. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, so people are asking you to stop lying, and you're getting financial penalties levied against you for spreading misinformation. But freedom of speech has never, it's written into the US Constitution in order to allow people to speak truths against power when those are uncomfortable. It's not there to allow you to yell fire in a crowded theater.
Or to tell an old person who with Alzheimer's that you're their nephew and need $20. That
exactly.
that's not a freedom of speech issue. That's a con man. That's Florida con man activity.
When I get a phone call saying your Amazon account has been compromised, we need your birthday and social security number so we can fix it for you. That's not somebody, and I say go to hell. That's not me impeding their freedom of speech. That's like, that best practices and standing up for good ethics.
Yeah, I think for me, this gets into this area of freedom of speech, kind of bleeds into this question of rights versus privileges.
Yeah.
And people who are claiming they have certain rights are actually trying to play their privilege. And somebody whose net worth is over $100 million can do pretty outrageous things because they can afford the lawyers to do the court battles and keep them in a privileged position. And it has, the average guy on the street who's giving up their hard-earned money to swindlers, they don't have those privileges. They don't have the privilege of having a degree after their name. They're trying to rely upon other people to filter the evidence and give them some honest information on what that sweet spot is. And the privilege that's being abused here, I've got a degree after my name. I'm not going to tell you how I'm using it, but I've got a degree, and I'm going to use that privilege to play on your fears, your worries. Of course, in a time like this, when there's fears about a new vaccine, people are scared about it. and they're looking for information. I remember when I was a kid, in the early 50s, it was in the middle of the polio epidemic. And people were scared to death about their kids getting polio or their friends getting polio and ending up in an iron lung. Didn't happen to a lot of people, but it happened to enough that the swimming pools were closed. You didn't hang out with people very much. And when the polio epidemic, when the polio vaccine became available, everybody was rushing to get it for themselves and their kids. And part of that, I believe, is that we were fortunate enough to have that generation of Americans who had served in World War II, who were willing to do something for the general good. Their rights didn't supersede the general good. They didn't know for sure that these vaccines were going to be safe, but if it looked as though it was going to help everybody else, they were willing to do that. And now, these guys who want to make a buck off their quack ideas about what's going to prevent COVID, they don't care about the general population. They care about lining his own pocketbook, because he's going to sell this stuff to you on his website. I wouldn't have half the problem with this Mr. Mercola if he wasn't selling this stuff, if he wasn't pointing us or pointing other people towards his products. If he was saying, I have absolutely no financial interest in this, this is what I think makes sense, well, that's his opinion. Go and buy it someplace else, but I'm not going to profit off it.
And fund anti-vax campaigns with the idea that vitamin C is the answer to it. And oh, by the way, vitamin C and quercetin is what he happens to sell. It's, for somebody who is claiming oppression, he's certainly using a lot of money and privilege and exploiting the weaknesses within our political system in order to fund himself. That seems like the opposite of oppression and privilege instead.
Yeah. If your net worth in 2017 was $100 million, I don't think there's much economic oppression there.
Yeah. I mean,
but it is a model that's working. Go ahead.
Yeah. It is working. Like, his business model is incite fear of vaccines and other public health measures, donate money to an organization that that advocates for weaker public health protection for the general populace around this fear. And, a lot of these people are going to be drawn to this organization and listen to what they're doing, and then sell the thing that this organization and that he's recommending as the healthy alternative to the vaccine. That creates a nice tidy Venn diagram for himself of inciting fear and profiting off of it.
I was reflecting on it today. I really think that the intellectual foundation of America, while we like to think it's science or the Greek classics, it's actually kind of Protestant Bible study. And a big part of that Protestant Bible study is that you can use the Bible to create whatever kind of theology you want. If you have a weird cult, you can find biblical support for it. And I think ultimately when people do their own research, but their roots are in this kind of Protestant Bible study rendition of scholarship, that's what they're doing. They're saying, well, I saw this one piece of this one research paper, and I'm going to use that as support. Gotcha.
Yeah, taking that completely out of context.
Yes. Yeah. I saw an Instagram quote that from Mr. Mercola that said, studies have warned, quote, studies have warned COVID-19 vaccines may result in more serious disease when exposed to the virus by way of pathogenic priming and immune enhancement, close quote. Now there's all these little code words in there. May result.
What's the probability of that may?
Exactly.
You know, I may get killed by a hippo tomorrow. They kill a lot of people, but I don't live in Africa, so the likelihood of that happening.
First hippo in the Dalles magically happens to trample you. That's
Sorry, go on, Tom.
Exactly. And this pathogenic priming and immune enhancement. And this is a direct dog whistle to the whole thing about vaccines causing autism, which if anyone has not looked into the data, it's been completely debunked. There's absolutely no relationship between vaccines and autism. And if anybody wants information on that, I'd be happy to provide it. You don't even have to go very deeply into the information.
One of the studies that was done on the relationship between vaccines and autism was designed and funded by an anti-vaccine foundation, I believe, and it ended up proving the opposite.
Oops.
Correct. And the person who came up with the original paper that purported to show this correlation was actually found to have falsified the data.
Oh.
Yeah.
Trouble is the cultural roots of anti-vax go back to the Ottoman Empire and go back to the first kind of predecessor of vaccinations. And it was done among the aristocracy in France and England first, but they had to be quiet about it because the general public thought of it as a Muslim or Ottoman Muslim practice. And there was a big question of whether it was a Christian thing to do.
And this is back to when they were like taking the fluid out of
exactly the relation. Yeah. So that they just the general fear that people have had about that and the movements that were being pushed at that time were strongly Islamophobic. And I don't mean that in today's sense where it's like, oh, the Middle East is this kind of, the Ottoman Empire was huge and there was a lot of fear about Ottoman power. So it was kind of
technology they developed was then became
was then suspicious. And you see the same kind of fear of people saying like, oh, this was made in a lab and then China put it on its own people. And it's like, look, have you ever met anybody in any position of competence in your life, in government or otherwise? That's just strategically unsound. Anyway, there's a lot of, in this space of ignorance, a lot of ideas come up. And the last year has been a place of mythology rather than fact. And that fear has really activated a lot of people's imagination, right? And, as a Chinese medicine doctor, I was curious about it. I don't know, what is this mRNA? So I looked into it and actually some herbs train the body in a certain way to work with the immune system in a very similar way. I'm not going to say it's exactly the same, but it's similar enough. So if you actually understand herbal medicine and are actually looking into it, this shouldn't be a thing of fear at all.
We mess with mRNA all the time. That's not how we think as Chinese medicine practitioners, but the herbs do have that effect.
Yeah. So if plant-based medicine is using this strategy, you could actually say that that they're copying nature.
Um, the I'm interested in what has happened to, and maybe it was just never there, but I thought it was, to degrees of trust between people who have different areas of expertise, and how, you know, this anti-intellectual trend has come and gone a lot over the history of the United States, I know, and other cultures as well. Andrew, you could probably speak to that more, but, you know, lately we have, anybody who's on social media will see their uncle posting something that is, you know, that he read while taking a crap on his phone, and claiming to be a, you know, an expert immunologist in, or epidemiologist in some respect. And you know, what this ends up being something that's patently false and written by somebody, you know, who looks like Joseph Mercola. And uh, and then, you know, you'll see people in the world of natural medicine or Chinese medicine trying to, you know, spread a lot of this, or taking one nugget of a study that wasn't peer reviewed or has been retracted or is taken completely out of context, and saying like that's going to result in death and dismay amongst anybody who gets a vaccine or wears a mask. It's like, I mean, people were saying that, like, when you, at the beginning of the pandemic, they were against mask wearing, and it's like, we're I'm I'm good at Chinese medicine. Like, I'm a Chinese medicine expert. Andrew, you're a Chinese medicine expert. You know, Tom, you're an MD and an anesthesiologist. Like, but we're not public health experts.
Once again, I think we come back to that fear, that fear of loss, and everybody can think of one thing that different branches of government have done very badly. They remember that one thing. If there are 10 other things that were done that protected them, oh, you've got a great fire department, you've got a great EMT service, you know, have school teachers who are doing a great job with your kids. But if somebody slips some fertilizer into a place that got into the water supply, that's what people remember. Okay. And nobody wants that one thing to happen, for sure. But we don't remember all the other ways that things are being done to make things safer and better for us. Now, I'm sure that my diet isn't great. It's not as good as it could be. But I'm sure that I don't want to go back to the diet of my Irish ancestors 600 years ago.
Oatmeal and butter.
Yeah. I mean, that's good living for breakfast a couple days a week, but you don't want that to be the only thing you eat.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so we've come, you know, a certain distance, and that was pretty much all natural back then. 600 years ago. There was a lot of kids dying.
GMO
up in like flies.
That's, oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think about when the Declaration of Independence was signed, and I looked at the signers, their ages, and it's like, I think there's one person in his 40s and two people in their 30s or something like that. And everybody else in their 20s, because everybody had died beyond that, mostly. And their diets were a whole lot more natural than ours are today, but you didn't live very long.
And is it okay to say that hygiene and industrial agriculture and vaccination may have contributed to some of that increase in life expectancy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to translate this, if all cops aren't bastards, if the majority of cops aren't beating up and killing Black people, if that's true, then is it possible that the majority of scientists around the world are not controlled by Bill Gates? Maybe Bill Gates does control some people. I'll give you that. He's a rich guy, maybe, right? Maybe.
Yeah.
But are the majority of scientists around the world, scientists in Nepal and India, and there are competent scientists all over the world, are the majority of them good? Are there systems in place because people know that human error exists and peer review is important? Are there systems in place that are utilized by people who are overall decent? If the majority of cops are not racist and out to kill Black people, then can you extend the same hope towards scientists as well?
Hashtag not all scientists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are some other very well documented things about just being human in general that play into this and are played upon by a lot of people. So one thing is that humans fear loss more than they appreciate gain.
Hmm.
You just take a look around. We have a huge insurance industry making millions of dollars off people because they fear loss. Now, and that predisposition, it's not like we fear loss a little bit more than we appreciate gain. It's a huge difference. Now, that makes sense, going back 50,000 years ago when the hippo was chasing Andy. You wanted hippo insurance. You didn't want to lose out and get trampled, to get an extra berry. So you paid attention to those things. Another way that plays into people is this thing that's called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
So when we don't know something and we're in a fearful place, if someone says something to us that agrees with our fear, that's a little bit of that insurance. If they agree with our fear, we tend to believe that more than the person who says, well, there's a little bit of a risk from this, that's true, but it's really, really small. So it's worth doing it. That little berry often doesn't seem like, so that gets translated into this situation where there's actually huge benefits to having the vaccine, in my opinion, and very little risk. But you can still, if somebody's got fear involved, you can play on that because they can hear those hippo hoofs coming.
I got suckered by this recently. If we're going to be pointing fingers, I've got to just admit that I got suckered into this myself. So then this last year, Lana's pregnant with twins at 40, very high risk, right? So they said, well, we can do a DNA test to screen for 500 potential diseases that your boys may have and be able to prepare for the worst. Okay. So I said, what is the likelihood they have any of these currently? Well, it's normally like 1/100%, but because of her age and everything, now it's a 50%. It's like, okay. So they presented it as double the risk.
2 times. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're doing this with COVID too. And so, I mean, you can laugh at people, but start with me, because yeah, Lon was like, we've got to know. I'm like, this is, sure, yes, the risk is double, but the risk is less than 1%. I will take that. Let's play Russian roulette. I'm going to go home at the end of the day if I squeeze this thing 100 times. So, so we paid way too much. I forget how much they're like, well, it's not covered by insurance, but you can do it if you want. It's like $2,000. Just threw it, just absolute waste of money for so-called peace of mind. But that's the thing. If you can get you want that, the fear of loss is just so much more than gain. It would have been way more logical to put that aside for the kids later in life, watch it, grow over time. But that's just the stupidity that we have as humans, myself included. So I thought I would volunteer that, because I know that through this discussion, we're creating cognitive dissonance with people that I really appreciate and like. And I just want to put out there that this isn't unique to you. We all fall into this to certain degrees.
I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, we have all fallen for these kinds of things at one time.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
And even if we know it's logically doesn't
Right.
make sense, right? It's still like, but what if, and here's another thing, full disclosure. I'm at home, we're just tucked away with newborn babies. I'm not going outside anyway. I wasn't first in line to get the vaccine. I was like, let's wait a month and see if they don't screw it up with the first time around.
Sure.
So I was hanging back a little bit. I did start as basically we were waiting for there to be any kind of hiccup, because there's always a hiccup the first round, but we did. So, yeah, I also wasn't the best. I also was hesitant in the beginning because I thought, are they rushing? I don't know. So that was my ignorance, my fear that played into that. Now, in retrospect, I can see that was irresponsible. I should have been in the front of the line. I can see that was my own fear that played on it, the fear of the unknown, the lack of trust for people in areas that should be areas of competence. So for those people who have been vaccine hesitant or have been saying, yeah, well, maybe this guy has a point. Maybe it is good to have vitamin C or just boost our immune system. Yeah, I can understand your point of view, because I've shared some of those feelings myself.
You were also in a place where you were able to be basically in quarantine during that period of time.
I was in self-quarantine during that time. That's true.
Yeah, you're not highly likely to be contracting it yourself or giving it to other people. And
I was doing my best on that.
That's a very calculated risk management on your part. And you're making a plan where you're like, okay, this is available now. Distrust of bureaucracy, I think, is healthy to a certain degree in any department. And so you're going to wait, you're going to see how this goes. You wait a month, it's fine. No big problems. All right, cool. We're ready to go. And that during that month period of time, you're unlikely to be spreading the virus yourself. Like, that's prudent. It's not a blanket disregard of the entire system that went into creating this and distributing it.
I appreciate you saying that. And at the same time, I was weighing on my personal judgment. I wasn't going with what epidemiologists were saying.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So even if that turned out to be okay, I'm still falling into the same thing that I'm saying, hey, maybe this isn't the wisest thing to do. And I'm just saying that with complete openness and vulnerability, because I don't want it to be like I'm pointing the finger at these folks, right? The difference is, though, I didn't tell people, don't take this at all, take Chinese herbs. And oh, by the way, I sell Chinese herbs. I mean, Brehan,
I sell Chinese herbs, and
right.
Before the vaccines were available, that was the best thing we could do.
Right.
And it's like, quarantine as much as you can, social distance, wear a mask, wash your hands, all of the things, keep your body healthy, all of
and
the
perhaps that includes vitamin C or exercise or those things. But
yeah, I mean, there's there were
bit of
close ties
nuance
from the beginning of the pandemic to having metabolic conditions and autoimmune disorders being a higher risk factor. It's like, you take all that into account if you can. If you don't have the training to make those kinds of judgments, consult with a professional. There's a vaccine available. Cool. Now you should get that. Like that's, I used herbs to protect myself, my family, my patients, like during the early stages of the pandemic. And then, when we had better technology, we embrace it.
And it's not a religious decision, is it? It's not like I'm on team Chinese medicine, I'm on team Western medicine. And I think a little bit of that, and I mentioned religion before as being the intellectual root. And I think that is worth looking at, because there's a divide in the United States of I use natural medicine or I use Western medicine, and people sometimes will fall into one camp or the other. But you go to China and ask Chinese medicine doctors, do you use Western medicine? They're like, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And it's not like, aha, Chinese medicine doesn't work. They're like, no, it has strengths. Western medicine has a lot of strengths, and we use the best of both if we can, or integrate them in a way that you remove side effects from medications. There's just more of a nuance with that. However, Chinese society, you can be Confucian, Buddhist, Taoist at the same time. They look at them as schools of thought. They don't look at them as like, you have to pick one or you're going to hell. And I think that intellectual bias comes into play when people are like, well, I've had patients say that I believe in natural medicine and I'm supposed to get chemotherapy, but I believe in natural medicine, so I'm here. And I've yelled at patients, like, get out of my office. I'm not going to kill you for your rigid beliefs, right? This is not a flexible way of thinking. And it's the easiest thing in the world, though, especially with fear. Like, if I wanted to be a total piece of shit, I could just say, Western medicine's evil. Buy herbs. Herbs are good for everything. And that's what people do out there, right? I found that this study of this medication said it has a side effect. Well, this herb that has no studies on it has no side. Well, of course, no side effect. It hasn't been studied, right? So then it's very easy to drop the fear of that 0.5% or whatever the side effect is on the medication, to then use that fear to sell so-called natural medicine. And it's just it's a bias that people fall for. I obviously am not too smart to fall for that myself. I did with that gene test. But yeah,
they tug on your heartstrings, and that's where we're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd like to touch into for a minute is, I think it circles back around to the individual freedom and my rights kind of thing. And I like myself. And I know
we like
I know
you too,
when I die, the world's going to go on. Okay. And I'm actually not that special. I'm not that unique. Okay. I like living, but I'm not that unique. And I got the vaccine as soon as it was available. And part of my thought process was, I've read the data. I think it's safe, but I don't know for sure. But I'm willing to do this for the people around me. And we'll see what happens. If I die and it turns out that the vaccine wasn't safe and that information gets passed on to people so they can look in another direction, great. If I got the vaccine and I've done well since then, great. I'm even a little bit happier. But there is, for me, something in here about looking outside my own personal boundary and thinking about what my kids and my grandkids are going to do in the community around me. For my patients, am I going to be safer in working with them? There was just a study released looking at the viral loads of, this is a really good example. There were two recent studies published about the viral loads in vaccinated and unvaccinated people who came up with the Delta variant. As there are some people who are getting the Delta variant now, even though they've been vaccinated. And the initial paper that came out showed that there was no difference in viral load between the two groups. So the anti-vax people had already started jumping on this, saying, see, it's not protecting anybody. You can still get it, you can still spread it. Well, the second study that came out shows very clearly that the initial viral load is the same when people come down with symptoms. But within 48 hours, the vaccinated viral load drops to 0. And in the unvaccinated population, it continues on for that 7 to 14 days. So you're spreading the virus to potentially many, many more people.
Let me translate this for my right wing leaning friends, because I do have friends all across the spectrum. If you have guns in your house and somebody kicks in your door and you blast them with your shotgun, the damage to the door is going to be the same, whether or not you had your shotgun. But after they kick in your door, whether they slice your fingers off and do godless things to you and your family, depends on whether you have that shotgun. So people protect their homes and invest in loss when it comes to using guns and thinking of their house as a fortress. It seems to me like this is self-defense for your immune system. You give your immune system a training course in how to deal with this. Yes, they knock in the door, but after that, do you blast them with a shotgun, or do they come through and steal your stuff and carry your wife off on a horse?
Yeah,